Hello, and welcome to Dave's American Flyer Trains for a video on the Railhead test of another successfully rebuilt pair of A.C. Gilbert diesel locomotives. You'll recognize these as the Set 3778, the Texas and Pacific twin GP-7 units from 1956 and 1957. The build date shown in the dummy A unit, which you see in the background, was March of 1957. Unusual, but there was no build date shown in the power unit, which is number 378. The power unit had the usual 4-position reverse, double worm drive power truck. The dummy A unit in the background, number 377, has diesel roar and a horn. They both have headlight illumination on both ends of the locomotive body, and they have the illuminated road number signs, and they both are knuckle coupler. For the dummy A unit in the background, there was nothing unusual about the rebuild. Certainly the process was the same, and that was complete disassembly. I did not take the handrails off. I have done that in the past on some trains, but not this one. It wasn't required. I cleaned the inside and, of course, spent a majority of the time on the trucks, the axles, the wheels, everything associated with the trucks, primarily spending a great deal of time to remove carbon dust or carbon burn or carbon residue and rust. And then with proper lubrication, I think it'll be an outstanding performer in both operation or response and its performance. On the bottom, you can see how well these turned out. Now, I did have a bit of a challenge with the shoe or slide contacts you see there in the center of the video. They were rusted considerably on the outside and on the interior, and they had developed rust in between them and the shoe box, so they both had to be removed and tediously cleaned, but it is well worth it to do that. Then, of course, the usual lubrication using a gear lube to lubricate the axle bushings will give us a really good performing locomotive. Although it doesn't do a whole lot other than make sounds, it still needs to be something that does not contribute any more drag or friction than necessary to the power unit. The rebuild of the power unit stands as another testament to the methodology used to put these back into outstanding performance and response condition. You know, one of the things I hear most often from folks who want their trains rebuilt or actually brought back to life will say, I want this to operate the same way it did on Christmas Day in 1955 or 56 or 57. And my usual response is, we're not going to do any spot repairs. That means that the train will need to be stripped down to its smallest parts, thoroughly cleaned, possibly polished, maybe worn parts replaced, and then reassembled to factory standards, including lubrication. That catches some by surprise. But we had trains on, say, Christmas Day of 1953, which is when I got my Mountaineer set with a 282 462 Pacific. They ran perfectly. The track was clean. The locomotives responded to commands. The locomotives performed exceptionally well, but they all had something in common, and that is they were clean. They were new, cleaned. So I tell people who want to have these brought back to a condition that reminds them of Christmas Day in the 1950s, that's what needs to be done. If A.C. Gilbert thought that these trains were ideal in the condition that they're in today, then he would have added rust and he would have added grease, an overabundance of grease, hardened grease, oil slung everywhere, and an abundance of carbon dust, but he didn't. They were made to be run in a clean state. And that all begins with the reverse unit on the interior of this power unit. I always start there because that is where, that's the life, the heart of the train. There was once somebody who rebuilt these that said, you get that right, and you're on the road to be successful in rebuilding and operating and with excellent performance and response of your trains. This one had nothing unusual. The reverse unit needed no new fingerboards nor fingers. However, I still separate the boards from the frame of the reverse unit. I still remove the drum. I still clean the interior of the reverse unit, including the pawl, which is the little mechanism that raises and lowers the plate. I clean and polish the ends of the fingers. I check each of them for proper tension and left to right position, and then begin the reassembly process and relubricate, even the surface of the drum. Now this is where I freely apply CRC 226, which enhances electrical performance and lubricates. So nothing unusual on this train with the reverse unit that the good cleaning and reassembly would not take care of. Next up, of course, was the motor on the front truck. Again, a thorough cleaning, total disassembly. I took it right down to the thrust plates in the chassis. Looking at those, checking them for the size of the dimples and the amount of lateral movement in the armature against those thrust plates. Cleaned the armature thoroughly, which included the commutator as well as the slots. This one had excessive carbon buildup in the slots, which was not good for the long life of the train. Polished the commutator. Even cleaned the surface and polished the surface of the wind on the armature. I even cleaned beneath the bearings that are on the shaft. I cleaned the shaft and of course the worm gears. The chassis is given a thorough cleaning, not only washing, but a blast of AutoZone brake cleaner, which is an acetone type material which will really eradicate grease and oil, including old grease and oil that are in the axle bushings. Therefore, you have to make sure that you properly lubricate those axle bushings with a gear lube upon reassembly. But again, nothing unusual. The brushes were good. The brush bracket assembly was good. The springs were good. All the wiring was stable. All the solder points were solid. I checked it with a volt-ohm meter continuity test, and it resulted in another very outstanding looking train. Now again, as with the the dummy A unit, there were some challenges with the slide contacts, with rust on the interior of both the slide contact, which is generally called the shoe, and the shoe box that holds the slide contact. Rust and corrosion from within. It even included the spring. I had to take a little bit of delicate action on the spring. And of course the motor reassembled perfectly. I took a great deal of time to not only remove the old pull mores, but to put new ones on for maximum traction, and spent a good bit of time polishing all components. The final step that I took a considerable amount of time on was the recentering of the armature within the field. I cleaned the interior of the field, which surprisingly always has a great deal, more than really expected, of grease, oil, carbon dust type material, that blackened material on the inside of those. Again, if A.C. Gilbert, I think, had thought that that would give a train maximum performance, they would have coated the interior of the field with that. But no, it came clean and it ran good. So I'll remove it with the hopes that it'll do the same. So enough with speaking about these. I'm first going to run the A unit, the power A unit by itself. I'm going to show you the setting on an 18B transformer, which is 175 watts. I doubt I'll be able to run this over the 60 miles per hour setting, which is roughly 50%, because I anticipate it could leave the track. Then it will pull the dummy A unit, and we'll give it a little bit of a sound test first. And then we'll do the usual test that A.C. Gilbert engineers describe in the factory service manuals for testing these locomotives. I believe this one is to pull 4 box cars. So let's get started.